Welcome back here to the show, Larry, Mike, and Brad. And great book coming out. Mike, we were talking in the break that I read that book, The System, that was all like the different college football kind of scandals, like some Mike Leach stories from Texas Tech and Washington State and stuff at BYU and other places. Great book coming out that we cannot wait to talk to the author here joining us. It's called The Price: What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. Mike, did I get that right?
Yeah, you've got it right. And I'm telling you, I'm looking right here on Amazon.com. If somebody wants to go and order it this minute, you can get it in hardcover. You can get it in Kindle. They've got all the ways you want to get a hold of it. So I just put in an order.
Love it. Love it. I'll be doing the same thing right after this. Armen Keteyian, one of the authors, and joining us right now, the other author is John Talty. He's a national college sports reporter for CBS Sports and 24/7 as well. John, welcome to the show.
Appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive right into this right now. Obviously, considering college football and the state of things in 2024, you had a lot to write about. You had a lot of material to work with.
Yeah, we did. It was a blessing and a curse, I think, at times. So we, at the start of this process, picked a couple coaches and schools and people that we thought were interesting to try to follow for a year or so. And we started working on this, I would say, probably like October, November 2022, and then it played out through all of 2023. And so some of the people that we picked at the start, of course, not knowing how things were going to turn out, were Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, Nick Saban at Alabama. We picked Arizona and Jedd Fisch. We picked a five-star recruit who at the time was committed to Alabama. He's now at Ohio State. And so just all these things that we never could have imagined at the start all played out at the end. And so it made it really fun to work on, but we had to pivot and change a couple of different times as we were going through it. As two of our main characters, Jim Harbaugh and Nick Saban, by the end of the book, they decided to leave college football. And so that kind of gave us a good conclusion. To get there, there was a lot that kind of went up and down.
The interesting thing to me is, how do you keep your point of view the same as the rules are literally evolving? It's almost like watching a film of one of those flowers growing, the stop action photography. How did you guys keep the narrative together as things were changing so rapidly?
Yeah, that was one of the big challenges. And Armen and I would joke that we were trying to build the plane and fly it at the same time. And it was hard as things changed to keep up with it. I think for us, our strategy was to try to just do really deep character portraits of different people and programs that we thought could stand the test of time as things changed. But I'll give you a good example. One of our chapters is about the NCAA enforcement team and how they were trying to police NIL and their strategy. And we went up there a couple of times and we built this whole narrative. And right as we were turning the first pass of the book in is when the Virginia and Tennessee lawsuit against the NCAA happened, which essentially enforcement couldn't do anything after that. And so you have to, we got to pivot a little bit at the end. And we had the House settlement a week ago, and that was the last week we could make a change. And so it's adding in a couple of things at the end, but trying to just show the story of how we got here. And I think our hope is that not only is there going to be a ton of stuff that people have never read before, never heard before about, again, some of these big name, Saban, Harbaugh, people like that, but I also think as things are so rapidly evolving, we're going to look back at this period 10 years from now and be like, what were we doing back then? And so my hope is this book will be like, this was what it was at its wildest. This is what it was really like, that it'll have value now. It'll have value 10 years from now when we have salary caps and rev share and all that. We thought, wait, we were making boosters pay for all this? Like, why was that a good idea? And I think it'll stand the test of time in that regard.
Talking with John Talty in his new book, once again, The Price: What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. You can find it right this minute, right now on Amazon. John, it sounds like you could do a sequel to this, talking about the chaos that it took to write the book about chaos. I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Is there, I don't want to give the book away, obviously. And first off, I know it's so good, there's no way you can. There's so much, like I said, that's in here. But what is there a takeaway that you had with college football, the way it's policed, where we're heading, that maybe you didn't have when you began the project?
I think one of the things that it gave me a greater appreciation for is just what it was like for people on the inside. And I think that there's one of my favorite shows is Mad Men, and there's a famous quote about that's what the money's for. And I think that we use that a lot when we hear coaches complaining, we hear administrators complaining, and that's why you get paid the money. That's what it's all about. And I get that and I appreciate that. But I do think when you're talking to these coaches, just how their lives have been upended, I think it gave me a greater appreciation for them on a human level of just how chaotic this was, how much this took time away from their families, and how much the recruiting and the NIL and all of that, how challenging it was to try to get their arms around what was a very chaotic and unregulated period of college football. And so I think that was one of my big ones. And I think it's hard not to feel mixed emotions of both being happy that players are finally getting paid after many years of them being taken advantage of to the benefit of others, but also just the way that money has infiltrated the sport and changed things. You think about the destruction of the Pac-12, and that's one of the chapters in our book, and just some of these traditions that I think make college sports unique and something that makes me love it so much. You just worry about whether they're starting to be washed away in the pursuit of kind of the almighty dollar. And I think that's over even just the last year, we've seen a lot of that play out. And again, you're happy that the players are getting paid, but as we move more and more toward a professionalized model, are we losing kind of the soul of college football in the process?
Is today any different than what we saw in the 80s with, let's say, the Pony Express? I wonder are we going back to where those type of no holds barred recruiting is going to be the standard, or do you think we'll get to a place where there's rules that will be enforced? I'm really curious as to your opinion on that.
Yeah, I think if we look at the last couple of years, I think the biggest difference is just the money was a lot bigger. To the best of my knowledge, it was never quite that big. We're hearing stories of quarterbacks getting, upwards of $2 million a year. Like that was beyond. And of course, some of that's inflation and all that, not to get in the weeds. I think what's going to be really interesting is part of this House settlement, which has been accepted but not approved, is just that enforcement component. I think there is a desire to put some sort of policing around it. But I guess just being deep in this world for as long as I have, there's just part of me that thinks that people are just always going to push the limits and people are always going to look for an advantage. And so we might have, say, $22 million salary cap, say 15 of that's dedicated to football. There are going to be schools, especially here in the South where I reside, well, 15 is not enough. Why don't we have another million or two under the table where we're going to do it in different ways? I just think that's always going to happen. I think it's always been happening. And so I think that what we see coming down the pike, I think should bring greater stability, but I don't think that it eliminates all the problems, because I think every time it's whack-a-mole. Every time you fix one, more pop up. And I just think that's what's coming down the line here.
Yeah, I think we completely see that. One thing we've talked about is with expansion. You referred to, again, there's a chapter in your book about the demise of the Pac-12. And we've been of the belief for the past 2 years, since UCLA and USC let their secret out, that we're not done. Like we think there's still more change to come. We may have staved it off for a couple of years, but we truly believe that college football, college athletics will look a lot different by the turn of the decade. What are your feelings on that in terms of still changes to come? I still think there's more to come in the ACC. I don't think the ACC gets to the end of its deal in 2036, and there's just no way that happens. What is your thought, if you had a crystal ball, in terms of, and again, not to give anything away of what you're working on, of where you think this is headed in the years to come?
Yeah, I think you hit on the most logical next place is the ACC. I think you've got Clemson and Florida State very obviously trying to get out, and they're maneuvering to do that. Where they end up, I think, is an interesting question. And a lot of people believe that's more likely the Big Ten than the SEC. We'll see how that ultimately plays out. I think from there, the next piece that I'm fascinated about is UNC. I mean, I think that's really the glue holding the ACC together. But to me, even more so than Florida State, I think North Carolina is the crown jewel of kind of what's available. I know that both the Big Ten and SEC are very interested in North Carolina. It makes sense for both of them. So to me, if UNC is willing to leave, then I think that's when you see the ACC start to just fall apart. And it'll be a mad dash for some of the higher quality programs. NC State, potentially, Virginia Tech, UVA, Louisville, I think, could certainly fit in the Big 12, other places like that. And then where did Boston College and the rest end up? That's probably a question they're not real super interested in answering or trying to figure out right now. But yeah, I just don't think it's done. I still think there's people that believe this ultimately ends up in some sort of super league. I think that some of the House stuff has quashed that a little bit, but I just think that just the way that we've seen things play out over the last few years is that ultimately people are always going to want more. And so right now it's gobbling up schools from other conferences. And then I think the next kind of iteration of it is, do the Alabamas and Georgias of the world say, why are we getting the same cut as Vanderbilt and Mississippi State? And then that's when you might see some further separation. Same thing you could say in the Big Ten. Ohio State and Michigan have more value than Rutgers, and that's just the reality of the world. And do they start throwing their weight around to get bigger cuts? It hasn't typically worked out well for other conferences when you go to an unequal rev share, but I just think that feels like the reality of where we're headed right now.
Yeah, I think the unequal rev share would almost have to be accompanied by some sort of way of drafting to make some sort of equity. Otherwise, you almost get into the situation where you get a super conference, and I'm not certain that Alabama fans or Ohio State fans, if you get 20 really powerful teams, I don't know how those fan bases deal with losing, because Ohio State's had 5 losing seasons since 1951. And then you go to a team like Illinois or Indiana that can go 10 years without a winning season. Yeah, you need somebody to get a W against. Have you thought about that super conference just from that logistical standpoint?
Sure. And I think about it even before that, and just in terms of realignment right now, right? So I think of the SEC, they're adding Texas and Oklahoma officially in July. Those are 2 iconic brands. They bring money, but they're also good programs. Even though Texas has been down, it seems like they're on the up right now, making the playoff last year. So you think about who would you want to add next? I don't think you necessarily want to add 2 heavyweights. I think that's why a UNC UVA make more sense, where they bump up the money, and it's a team that you could realistically beat. So I do think you have to start thinking a little bit more strategically. You look at the Big Ten, you added 4 programs that, outside of UCLA, the other 3 are pretty strong. They're going to be competitive for the playoff. If you're in Illinois, Maryland, or Rutgers, that's not great for you. That just makes the path harder. And so if you think about moving forward, who would you want to add? I don't think you want to add a superpowered college football team, because at a certain point, this is a point that I make in the book, you can't hang a championship banner for how much money you make every year. Like, at the end of the day, fans don't care how much revenue that Illinois is making. It doesn't really matter. You want to win. And if you're adding more and more schools that bump up the money but make your chances of winning less, like, it's hard to get the fan base on board with that. And that's what I think the Big Ten it's going to be interesting to see this year, how that starts to play out. If you're a Maryland fan, and I went to Maryland, like, getting out of that division is a good thing, but having to add a Washington, Oregon every year to your schedule is not. And so that's going to be a challenge. And that's what I think you might see some of that factor into some of the realignment decisions moving forward.
Yeah, the schedules are unbalanced, but to your point, you're adding some power teams. How many years out of how many years will the unbalance fall into your favor if you're one of those that doesn't win on a regular basis? You're exactly right. John, we will leave it there, but we are thrilled that you spent time with us. Once again, the book, The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. John Talty, along with Armen Keteyian. John is a day job national college sports reporter for CBS Sports and 24/7. But again, go to Amazon right now and grab that copy. John, we cannot wait to dig into this. Congrats on the book. Have an awesome summer, and hopefully you'll spend some time with us again later on and let us know how the book has gone and the next project you're working on.
Can't wait. Would love to do that. Enjoyed talking to you guys, and happy to come back on in the future.
Sounds good. Awesome. John Talty, once again, the book, The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. Be sure to check that out. John Talty joining us here on the show. Quick timeout and more to come after this.